Imagine absolute silence. Then, a violent, blinding flash across the darkness of deep space. A red giant star, billions of years old, exhausts the very last of its nuclear fuel. The core collapses under its own immense gravity, and in a fraction of a second, it detonates. A supernova. It tears the star apart, scattering its guts across the cosmos in a spectacular, violent death. Now, shift your focus. Bring it close, to a quiet forest on a chilly afternoon. A single withered autumn leaf detaches from an oak branch. It drifts silently and lands softly on the damp earth. A dying star, a falling leaf. Two events separated by trillions of miles and billions of years, yet they are bound by the exact same universal law, an invisible thread that pulls everything in existence toward a single, inescapable destination. Physicists call it the Second Law of Thermodynamics, entropy, the universe's fundamental drive toward disorder and chaos, the rule that dictates that everything, eventually, falls apart. Over 2,000 years ago, long before we had telescopes or the mathematics of thermodynamics, a man sitting under a Bodhi tree observed the exact same phenomenon. He didn't look up at the stars, he looked inward. He called it Anicca, the undeniable truth of impermanence. Science gave us the math of decay. The Buddha gave us the psychology of it. We spend so much of our lives fighting this invisible current. We build monuments we hope will last forever. We buy creams to hide our wrinkles. We chase a feeling of permanence in a universe that mathematically forbids it. I honestly don't fully understand the modern obsession with curing death. You look at Silicon Valley billionaires pouring their fortunes into anti-aging research, trying to freeze their bodies or upload their consciousness to a server. To me, it feels like fighting gravity. You might jump high for a second, but the ground always wins. But then again, maybe that's just my view. I'm quite certain that fighting entropy is a war we are biologically and physically destined to lose, but I suppose human rebellion against nature is what got us this far in the first place. Because entropy isn't just out there in the cold vacuum of space, it is inside your cells right now. Every time your heart beats, a tiny bit of energy is lost to heat. Your DNA replicates, but like a photocopy of a photocopy, slight errors occur over time. The machine slows down. That is biological entropy. And this is where the genius of the Buddha's realization comes in. He saw that the suffering doesn't come from the decay itself. The suffering comes from our resistance to it. We hold on to the dying star. We try to glue the autumn leaf back onto the tree. I remember the exact moment this really hit me. It wasn't in a physics class or a meditation retreat. It was watching my grandfather, a man who used to lift me up with one arm when I was a kid, struggling just to open a jar of water. I saw the entropy in his hands. It broke my heart initially, but then there was this strange sense of peace that followed, knowing he was just returning to the natural flow of the universe. I don't know if anyone else has ever experienced that specific kind of quiet heartbreak, that moment you truly realize someone you love is made of failing stardust. I only know a fraction of the biology behind cellular senescence. I'm sure there are medical professionals or physicists listening right now who understand the exact mechanics of the cellular breakdown far better than I do, who could explain the exact molecular chaos happening in that moment. But it makes you wonder, doesn't it? If everything is falling apart, if the stars will eventually burn out into a cold, dark void, and our bodies will inevitably return to dust, what is the point of creating anything? What is the point of loving anyone? If you knew for an absolute fact that the universe would end tomorrow, would you still plant a tree today? I still find myself wrestling with that. Is the value of a thing found in how long it lasts, or is it valuable precisely because it is fleeting? The impermanence of things isn't a curse. It is the very mechanism that makes life precious. A plastic flower lasts forever, but it carries no emotional weight. A real rose is beautiful because it dies. We are a temporary arrangement of atoms, capable of experiencing our own decay and finding beauty in it anyway. If you look at this cosmic scale of decay, this undeniable truth of Anicca, and you had to describe your feeling toward it in just one single word, what would that word be? For me, that word is relief. Imagine holding a porcelain teacup. Delicate. Perfect. Now, let it slip from your fingers. It hits the hardwood floor and shatters into 100 jagged pieces. Tea splashes everywhere. You know exactly what just happened. But try to imagine the exact opposite. Imagine the puddle of tea suddenly rushing back together, defying gravity, crawling up into the air. Imagine the 100 porcelain shards leaping off the floor, perfectly fusing back into a pristine cup and landing softly in your hand. You have never seen this happen. You will never see this happen. Why? This is a direct experience I think we all share on some level. I remember knocking over a glass of water when I was younger, and in that split second before it hit the ground, I wished with everything I had that I could just hit rewind. I don't know if anyone else has ever had that exact moment of wishing to just reverse reality for a few seconds. But reality doesn't come with a rewind button. The reason that teacup will never put itself back together is governed by the most ruthless rule in physics, the Second Law of Thermodynamics. It dictates that in any isolated system, entropy, which is the ultimate measure of disorder, can only increase. It never decreases. This isn't just about broken cups. This is the very reason why yesterday is different from tomorrow. Physicists call it the arrow of time. Time only flows in one direction, pointing relentlessly toward chaos. If I had to make a definitive statement right now, I would say time travel to the past is absolutely impossible, simply because you cannot force a shattered universe back into a pristine cup. I really don't see any physical flaw in that thermodynamic reality, even though pop culture wants us to believe otherwise. But how do we know this is a fundamental truth of existence and not just a cosmic coincidence? In the late 19th century, an Austrian physicist named Ludwig Boltzmann stared into the void of this chaos and found the underlying code. S equals K log W. It is an equation so profound, so heavy, that it is literally carved into Boltzmann's tombstone in Vienna. S is entropy, the disorder, but the terrifying secret of reality lies in W. W represents the number of ways things can be arranged, microstates. Think about our teacup. There is really only one specific way the atoms can be arranged to make a perfect usable cup, but there are trillions of ways those same atoms can be arranged as a pile of broken dust on the floor. The universe doesn't actively hate order. It's purely a matter of probability. There are simply infinitely more ways to be broken than there are to be whole. I'm explaining this through the lens of classical thermodynamics, but I am absolutely certain there are people listening right now who understand the deepest layers of quantum mechanics. I know for a fact there must be someone who could look at the arrow of time at a subatomic level and see a mechanism that I haven't even touched upon here. But looking at the grand macroscopic scale of it all leaves me with a thought I can't quite shake. If entropy is always increasing, if the entire universe is constantly moving from a state of order to absolute disorder, that means in the very beginning, at the exact moment of the Big Bang, the universe must have been in a state of absolute, perfect order, the ultimate low entropy state. And I simply cannot find a clear answer to this. What put it in that perfect order to begin with? Before the teacup dropped, who or what placed it on the table? If you sit with that thought for a moment, the idea that time itself is just the slow unraveling of perfection into chaos. If you had to capture the feeling of time only moving forward in just one single word, I wonder what it would be. For me, that word is inescapable. When you look up at the night sky, it feels eternal. The constellations we see tonight are the exact same shapes the ancient Egyptians mapped, the same stars the Polynesian navigators used to chart their courses across the Pacific. It feels like a static painting, hanging perfectly still in the dark. But it is an illusion, a magnificent slow-motion illusion. If you zoom in close enough to any of those points of light, including our own sun, you realize it is not a peaceful, permanent object. A star is a war zone. It is locked in a billion-year struggle for its own survival. On one side, you have the crushing, relentless force of its own gravity, pulling all of its mass inward, trying to collapse it. On the other side, you have nuclear fusion. Deep in its core, the star is violently smashing hydrogen atoms together to create helium. This process releases an explosive outward energy that pushes back against the crush of gravity. That delicate, violent balance between collapsing inward and exploding outward is what makes a star shine. In a way, a star is nature's ultimate rebellion against entropy. It takes the raw, chaotic dust of the universe and organizes it, forging elements, creating heat, generating light. But there is a catch to this rebellion. You cannot cheat the second law of thermodynamics forever. To fight off gravity, the star has to constantly burn through its limited fuel supply. It is quite literally burning itself alive just to maintain its order. Eventually, the hydrogen runs out. The star begins to devour its own helium, then carbon, fighting desperately to keep the fire going. But the fuel always runs dry. The fusion engine sputters, and gravity, patient, inescapable gravity, finally wins. I am describing this on a macroscopic scale, but I am absolutely certain there are listeners tuning in right now who study astrophysics, people who understand the deep quantum mechanics of stellar nucleosynthesis far better than I do, who could map out exactly the mathematics of how iron is forged in those final, desperate milliseconds before a star's core collapses. I would actually love to know how someone immersed in that intense, high-level math views this cosmic inevitability. Because if we fast forward the clock, past the death of our sun, past the death of the Milky Way, we arrive at a terrifying horizon. Physicists call it the Dark Era, or more bluntly, the heat death of the universe, the Big Freeze. There will come a day when the very last star in the cosmos exhausts its fuel. The lights will simply go out. The universe will continue to expand, growing endlessly colder, darker, and more isolated. All the usable energy will be spent. The universe will reach a maximum entropy. You might think that the black holes will remain, that they will stand as the ultimate eternal vaults of the cosmos. But even they are not immune to the decay. Decades ago, Stephen Hawking proved that black holes leak very slowly, particle by particle. They emit what we now call Hawking radiation. Over trillions upon trillions of years, even the most supermassive black holes will slowly evaporate into nothingness. What is left is a universe of cold, thin, lifeless radiation, a void where absolute zero is the rule, where nothing can ever be built, nothing can ever be broken, and nothing ever happens. Forever. This paints a profoundly different picture of reality. The universe is not a grand, eternal monument. It is a sandcastle built on the shoreline, and the cosmic tide of entropy is slowly, systematically washing it away. This is the macro level of Anicca, the fundamental Buddhist realization that absolutely everything, even the fabric of space, time, and gravity, is completely impermanent. Sitting with this realization, I can't help but wonder, if the universe is destined to forget itself entirely, if every monument we build and every star in the sky is mathematically guaranteed to be erased, does that absolute, inescapable impermanence make this tiny, brief flicker of human consciousness the most intensely valuable thing in the dark? I still struggle to find a definitive answer for myself between those two extremes. If you are visualizing this right now, the slow fading of the final stars, the evaporation of the black holes, the ultimate silence of the big freeze, if you had to choose just one single word to describe how that vast, inevitable emptiness makes you feel, what would it be? For me, the word is humbling. Look down at your own hand for a moment. Just look at it. It looks solid, doesn't it? It feels permanent. You wake up every morning, you look in the mirror, and you believe you are essentially the same person you were yesterday. But that is a beautiful biological lie. The idea that you are a solid, static object is an illusion. Right now, as you sit there listening to my voice, you might feel like you are at rest, but beneath your skin there is a frantic, violent war happening every single microsecond. You are fighting the exact same invisible force that rips galaxies apart. You are fighting the second law of thermodynamics. You are fighting entropy. If you leave a piece of iron out in the rain, it rusts, it decays into the earth. If you leave a biological body without sustenance, it breaks down, it rots. The natural flow of the universe is to push your body toward chaos and disorder. So, how are you still here? How are you holding your shape? In 1944, one of the founding fathers of quantum mechanics, Erwin Schrodinger, stepped entirely outside of his field to write a short, profound book called What is Life? He looked at the biological world through the cold, hard lens of physics, and he realized something terrifying and magnificent. Life is not a permanent structure. Life is a localized mechanism to decrease entropy. Schrodinger pointed out that a living organism avoids decaying into absolute chaos by constantly sucking orderliness from its environment. We survive by consuming order. Think about an apple. An apple is a masterpiece of biological and chemical architecture. It is highly organized. It is a package of very low entropy. You pick it up, you take a bite, and your internal machinery violently breaks it down. You destroy its structure. You steal the order from that apple to rebuild your own decaying cells, to keep your heart beating, to maintain your physical form. But the thermodynamic bill always comes due. You cannot destroy entropy, you can only move it. So, in exchange for stealing the apple's order, your body radiates heat into the air. You exhale warm, chaotic carbon dioxide. You excrete waste, high entropy. To maintain the illusion that you are a solid, permanent thing, you must constantly act as an entropy engine. You are literally surviving by making the rest of the universe messier. I remember sitting alone at a dinner table not too long ago, just staring at a simple plate of food, and this thought hit me with an incredible heavy weight. I realized that my very existence, my consciousness, my ability to just sit there and breathe required the continuous destruction of order around me. I don't know if anyone else has ever had a moment like that, just suddenly freezing in the middle of a mundane task and realizing the brutal cosmic mathematics of staying alive. It really makes you wonder if our survival strictly requires us to constantly increase the chaos of the universe around us. Are we rebelling against nature, or are we the ultimate, most efficient expression of it? I still struggle to clearly separate those two ideas. Because when you really understand this, you realize you are not a noun, you are a verb. You are exactly like a whirlpool in a fast-moving river. The water is constantly rushing in and rushing out, spinning violently. From the riverbank, the whirlpool looks like a permanent thing. It has a shape, it has a name. But the moment the water stops flowing, the moment the energy stops moving, the whirlpool instantly disappears back into the chaotic current. That is what you are. A temporary, beautiful whirlpool of order, desperately feeding on the world around you just to hold your shape for a few decades. You are not static. You are a fleeting, continuous event. We just established that you are a temporary event, a whirlpool in the river of entropy. But what dictates exactly how long that event lasts? If you keep eating the apples, if you keep stealing order from the universe, Why can't the whirlpool just keep spinning forever? For a long time, we thought aging was just like a machine breaking down, a car left out in the elements. We thought it was just random, chaotic damage accumulating over decades. But it is not random. It is programmed. There is a literal, physical countdown clock ticking away inside almost every single cell of your body right now. To understand this, you have to look deep inside the nucleus of your cells, right at the ends of your DNA. Picture your chromosomes like shoelaces. You know those little plastic caps at the ends of your shoelaces that keep them from fraying? In your biology, those caps are called telomeres. Every single time your cells divide to keep you alive, to heal a cut, to grow your hair, to replace a dying skin cell, the DNA has to copy itself. But the copying mechanism is slightly flawed. It cannot copy all the way to the very tip. So every time a cell divides, that little cap, that telomere, gets snipped. It gets shorter and shorter. In the 1960s, a scientist named Leonard Hayflick discovered something terrifying. He found that a normal human cell can only divide about 50 times. That's it. Once it hits 50, the telomeres are entirely burned away. The shoelace frays, the cell stops dividing. It enters a state called cellular senescence. It becomes what biologists literally call a zombie cell. It doesn't die, but it stops working and it starts spewing toxic chemicals into the tissue around it. This is the Hayflick limit. This is the biological wall you are speeding toward. Now, I'm giving you the blueprint here, but I'm absolutely certain there are molecular biologists or geneticists listening right now who understand the terrifying elegance of telomeric attrition way better than I do. I would actually love to know how someone who looks at DNA under a microscope every day processes the emotional weight of seeing that physical countdown in real time. Because we actually found a way to cheat this clock. And the result was completely tragic. Dr. Elizabeth Blackburn won a Nobel Prize for discovering an enzyme called telomerase. It's an enzyme that can actually rebuild those caps. It can add length back to the telomeres. When this was discovered, people thought it was the holy grail, the absolute cure for aging. But nature is incredibly cruel. If you activate too much telomerase in a human cell, it forgets how to die. It divides wildly, endlessly, without limits. We have a word for a cell that refuses to obey the Hayflick limit, a cell that tries to become immortal. We call it cancer. If I had to make a definitive statement on this, I would say the modern pursuit of biological immortality through genetic hacking is ultimately a trap. We are tightly squeezed between two inevitable fates. We either run out of telomeres and age, or we turn on the immortality enzyme and develop cancer. There's no escape route. I really don't see any biological loophole out of that thermodynamic reality. But it makes you wonder, doesn't it? If a pill was invented tomorrow that perfectly stabilized your telomeres without causing cancer, would you actually take it? Would living for 500 years make your daily choices more meaningful, or would it completely strip life of its urgency and purpose? I still struggle to find a clear answer for myself between those two extremes. And even if you could pause the DNA clock, you're still fighting another war. The engine is tearing itself apart. Inside your cells are thousands of tiny power plants called mitochondria. They're the engines that burn the oxygen you breathe and the food you eat to give you energy. But these engines are messy. When they burn fuel, they leak toxic exhaust. Biologists call them free radicals. These tiny, unstable molecules bounce around inside your cells, smashing into proteins, damaging DNA. It's literal internal rust. When you're young, your body has a brilliant recycling program. It's a process called autophagy. It means self-eating. Your cells actually hunt down the damaged engines, swallow them, and recycle the parts to build fresh ones. But as the decades pass, the cleanup crew gets tired. Autophagy slows down. The damaged mitochondria pile up inside you, leaking more and more toxic exhaust. The engine chokes on its own waste. Your skin wrinkles. Your muscles weaken. Your memory fogs. Entropy wins. I remember the first time I really understood this brutal biological reality. I was just staring at my own hands, realizing the cells in my skin were quietly reaching their division limit one by one. The internal engines were rusting. It was a terrifying feeling at first, but then very slowly it shifted into something else, something strangely peaceful. I don't know if anyone else has ever had a moment like that, just suddenly feeling the quiet ticking of your own biology and realizing you're just participating in a grand, unavoidable cosmic rhythm. If you're listening to this right now, feeling the breath filling your lungs, knowing that every single heartbeat is mathematically counting down, if you had to choose just one single word to describe how that reality makes you feel in this exact second, for me, that word is awake. There is a multi-billion-dollar industry right now
heavily funded by some of the most powerful minds in Silicon Valley, operating on a single, massive assumption. The assumption that death is just a disease, a technical glitch that we can eventually patch out of our biological software. If I have to lay my cards on the table, I firmly believe this modern obsession with curing death is the ultimate scientific hubris. I really don't see how injecting billions of dollars into anti-aging startups can ever outsmart the fundamental laws of the universe. You can certainly put better oil in the machine. You can optimize the diet, edit the genes, and slow the decay down, but you cannot negotiate with entropy. Look at the rising trend of cryogenics, the idea of draining the blood from a deceased human being, replacing it with medical-grade antifreeze, and plunging the body into a vat of liquid nitrogen at minus 320 degrees Fahrenheit. The entire premise relies on the hope that future medicine will eventually thaw them out, repair the cellular damage, and restart their consciousness. I understand the basic principles of vitrification, the chemical process of turning fluids into a glass-like state to prevent the cells from bursting when frozen, but I am entirely certain there are biophysicists or cellular engineers listening right now who understand the microscopic violence of extreme cold far better than I do. I would genuinely love to know how someone who studies the structural integrity of human tissue deals with the sheer thermodynamic improbability of ever reversing that kind of profound biological chaos. That makes you think, though. Let's say, hypothetically, they actually succeed. Let's say in 300 years they unfreeze a person, repair their cells, and they open their eyes in a completely alien world where absolutely everyone they ever loved has been dust for centuries. I still can't find a clear answer for this for myself. In that scenario, did you actually conquer death, or did you just invent a much more terrifying, lonely way to experience it? Because when we strip away the science fiction and the billionaire funding, the reality of entropy isn't happening in a high-tech laboratory. It is happening right now, in our living rooms. It is the wrinkling of the skin, the stiffening of the joints, the quiet, daily loss of vitality. And sometimes it is far more cruel than physical aging. Sometimes it is neurological entropy. Alzheimer's, dementia, the physical breaking down of the delicate electrical pathways. This is a reality I had to face firsthand. I remember sitting across from my grandparent, a person who had known me my entire life, who taught me how to read. I looked into their eyes and realized with a sudden crushing weight that the grand library of their mind was slowly burning down, one book, one memory at a time. The physical body was still sitting right there, breathing, eating, smiling, but the intricate order of their consciousness was dissolving back into chaos. I don't know if anyone else has ever had to sit in that specific kind of heavy silence, watching someone you fiercely love physically sitting in front of you, but mentally drifting away into the fog. It is a profound, shattering experience to witness the mind unspooling. It strips away every illusion of control we think we have. You cannot freeze that. You cannot inject an enzyme into a fading memory to stop it from slipping into the dark. Entropy comes for the mind just as surely as it comes for the stars. But maybe this unavoidable breakdown isn't a design flaw. Maybe the lines forming around your eyes, the graying of your hair, the fading of your youth, maybe they aren't signs of biological failure. Maybe they are the physical receipts of a life actually lived. If you look at the lines on your own hands right now, knowing they are the undeniable evidence of your body slowly returning to the earth, and you had to choose just one single word to describe that deeply personal process of decay, what word would that be? For me, that word is testament. Over 2 millennia before we knew anything about telomeres, thermodynamics, or cellular rust, a young man was locked inside what we could call the ultimate low-entropy environment, a palace built on a beautifully orchestrated lie. His father, a highly powerful king, essentially tried to do exactly what modern tech billionaires are trying to do today. He tried to outlaw decay. He banished sickness, aging, and death from the palace walls. When a flower began to wilt in the royal gardens, it was quietly removed before the prince could see it. Siddhartha Gautama was raised in a meticulously manufactured bubble of artificial permanence. But you cannot lock entropy out forever. It always finds a way in. The story goes that the prince finally ventured outside the palace gates, and what he saw completely shattered his reality. In Buddhist tradition, they are known as the four sights. But if you strip away the myth and look at them through the lens we have been using, you realize Siddhartha didn't just see religious symbols. He suffered a brutal, acute awakening to biological entropy. First, he saw an old man, frail, bent over, struggling to walk. Siddhartha didn't just see a senior citizen, he was witnessing cellular senescence for the very first time. He was looking at a human being whose internal engines were quietly grinding to a halt. Then he saw a sick man, covered in sores, crying out in pain. He was witnessing the sudden collapse of biological order, the immune system failing, the delicate balance of the body being overwhelmed by chaos. And then he saw a corpse being carried to a funeral pyre, the ultimate thermodynamic equilibrium, a machine that had finally stopped pulling energy from the world, surrendering its structure, returning its atoms to the ash and the earth. Finally, he saw an ascetic, a man who had renounced the world, sitting in deep contemplation, trying to find a way out of this inescapable cycle of decay. It hit the prince like a physical blow. This wasn't just a tragedy happening to strangers in the street, it was his fate too. The golden walls of his palace couldn't protect his cells from dividing. They couldn't protect his mind from eventually fading. When I think about that palace, I really can't help but wonder, if you were given the choice today to live in that exact same bubble, a perfect simulation where nothing ever ages, nothing ever breaks, and no one you love ever dies, would you actually walk through that door? I still find myself completely torn on whether an existence with absolutely no decay would be a technological heaven or just a very quiet, very beautiful prison. Because what the prince realized long before he became the Buddha was that the suffering doesn't come from the dying itself. The suffering comes from the illusion that things are supposed to last. He eventually left everything behind, sat under a tree, and decoded the physics of existence into a profound psychological truth. He introduced a concept that sits at the very core of reality. He called it sankhara. Sankhara translates roughly to fabrications or conditioned things. It means absolutely anything that is put together. Think about it. A porcelain teacup is a sankhara. A red giant star burning in the dark is a sankhara. Your physical body, your deepest memories, your entire identity, all of it is just a temporary assembly of smaller, fleeting pieces. And the absolute, unbreakable rule of the universe is this: whatever is put together must eventually be taken apart. Sabbe sankhara anicca. All conditioned things are impermanent. He saw that we suffer because we look at a cloud and demand that it holds its shape forever. We look at our bodies, our bank accounts, our empires, and we demand permanence from a universe that only knows how to flow. We are terrified of the wind without realizing that we are the wind. If you take a second right now to think about the one thing in your life you are holding on to the tightest, the one thing you are most terrified of losing to time, if you had to describe the feeling of slowly letting go of that grip in just one single word, what would it be? For me, the word is terrifying. But maybe that terror is the only way to actually wake up.
When we think of enlightened beings, saints, or spiritual masters, our minds tend to paint them in a golden, supernatural light. We imagine them floating slightly above the earth, immune to the fragile, messy reality of being human. We want them to have magical bodies that do not age, do not bleed, and do not break. But the oldest records of the Buddha's life tell a story that is shockingly, almost brutally real. It is found in an ancient text called the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, the detailed record of his final journey, his final days on this earth.
In these pages, the Buddha is 80 years old, and he is not glowing. He is dying. He was walking on foot through ancient India, his body carrying 80 years of biological wear and tear. The text tells us he suffered from severe, chronic back pain. It was so intense that during his travels, he frequently had to stop, lie down on his side, and ask his disciples to speak on his behalf. And then, near the end of his journey, he ate a meal that triggered a violent, agonizing bout of dysentery. He was bleeding internally. He was purging. He was utterly exhausted, dehydrated, and in deep physical pain. The historical Buddha didn't magically transcend the second law of thermodynamics. His mitochondria were failing. His DNA replication limits had been reached. His physical body was collapsing into thermodynamic equilibrium, exactly like a dying star. There is a moment in the text where he sits under the shade of a tree, looking at his closest disciple, Ananda, who is weeping at the sight of his master's physical decline. And the Buddha says something so human, so raw, that it has echoed through 25 centuries. He looks at his friend and says, "Ananda, I am now old, aged, burdened with years. Just as an old cart is kept going by being tied together with straps, so the Tathagata's body is kept going by being strapped together. If I'm being entirely honest, this is the most powerful moment in the entire Buddhist canon. Many religions try to turn their founders into immortal, flawless icons who easily defy biological limits. But Buddhism does something incredibly radical. It shows its founder as an old, broken, hurting man. I firmly believe that if the Buddha used supernatural powers to bypass physical pain and aging, his entire philosophy on impermanence would have been a hollow lie. He had to decay, because the universe decays. Scholars and historians have debated for centuries about the exact cause of his final illness. There is a fierce linguistic debate about his last meal, a dish called sukara madhava. Some translate it as soft pork, others as a type of wild truffle or mushroom dug up by pigs. I know we have Pali scholars and serious students of Buddhist history listening right now who might have spent years researching these specific texts. I would genuinely love to hear your perspective on this translation, because the physical catalyst of his final hours tells us so much about the historical reality of that moment. But it leaves us with a great puzzle that we all have to face eventually. When you are lying in a sickbed or watching someone you love struggle to breathe, where does the physical pain end and where does the mental suffering begin? If we cannot stop the first arrow, is it truly possible for the human mind to completely refuse the second?
We have walked through the cold mathematics of thermodynamics and the ancient paths of Indian philosophy. But do not make the mistake of thinking this is an Eastern concept or purely modern scientific discovery. This realization, the quiet, haunting truth of decay, is woven into the very fabric of human history. Every culture, separated by vast oceans and centuries of time, eventually arrived at the exact same dark, beautiful truth. It is not just physics. It is not just Buddhism. It is fundamentally human. If you turn to the Far East, to Japan, you find an entire aesthetic and philosophical lifestyle built around this very reality. They call it wabi-sabi, the active appreciation of things that are imperfect, impermanent, and incomplete. They do not run from decay, they dance with it. They even turned the physical act of entropy into a breathtaking art form called kintsugi. When a precious ceramic bowl falls and shatters on the floor, they do not sweep the shards into the trash, and they do not try to hide the damage with invisible glue. Instead, they mend the fractures with a special lacquer dusted with genuine powdered gold. They highlight the breaks. They make the scars the most prominent, beautiful part of the object. This is a deliberate visual embrace of entropy. They are saying that the damage is not a defect to be hidden, it is the physical history of the object, and that history makes it far more valuable than it was when it was pristine. I remember the first time I tried to do something like this. I dropped a ceramic mug that had been handed down to me, a simple object but filled with sentimental meaning. It shattered on the floor. Instead of throwing it away, I sat down and spent hours gluing the pieces back together, leaving the rough, cracked edges completely exposed. It sits on my shelf right now, deeply scarred, completely imperfect, but I find myself valuing it far more than any flawless cup I could buy in a store. I wonder if anyone else listening right now has a treasured possession like that in your home, something chipped, worn down, or repaired that you refuse to throw away because its decay is exactly what makes it irreplaceable. If you travel west, across the Eurasian continent, to the borders of the ancient Roman Empire, you find the exact same realization. Under the flickering light of a candle in a military tent on the cold German frontier, the Emperor Marcus Aurelius was writing to himself, his personal journals, which we now know as meditations. Aurelius practiced Stoicism, a philosophy that leaned heavily on the phrase Memento Mori, remember that you must die. He looked at the massive, seemingly eternal Roman Empire, and he realized it was nothing but a temporary pattern. He wrote that human life is a point, our existence a flowing stream, our perception a dim light, and our body a prey to worms. He was the most powerful man on earth, yet he understood that his crown was just a momentary arrangement of atoms destined to be disassembled. This historical truth of societal entropy, the fact that even our greatest structures must crumble, was captured perfectly by the English Romantic poet Percy B. Shelley in his masterpiece Ozymandias. He writes, "I met a traveler from an antique land who said, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear, 'My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away.'" Think about that image, a massive, boastful monument to a great king completely swallowed by the silent desert sands. It is the perfect metaphor for societal entropy. Empires decay exactly like stars. I am quite convinced that our modern obsession with digital legacy is just a high-tech version of Ozymandias' pedestal. We spend so much energy trying to build an online immortality, curating our social media archives, storing our data in the cloud, believing these servers will preserve our legacy forever. But digital entropy is just as real as desert sands. Your server farms will eventually go dark, your files will corrupt, and the digital wind will blow your data away into nothingness. I don't think there is any difference between an ancient king carving his name on stone and a modern human uploading their life to a digital cloud. It is the same desperate fight against the inevitable. And yet, we keep building, we keep painting, we keep writing, we keep loving. It leaves us with a beautiful, unresolved riddle. If we know that the sands of time will eventually erase every single thing we create, if every empire, every poem, and every ceramic bowl is destined to crumble, why do we still feel this powerful instinctual urge to build? Is the act of creation a foolish defiance of entropy, or is it the only way we have to honor the fleeting moment?
When you sit with this reality, this inescapable, slow unspooling of the universe, your mind naturally starts to search for a loophole. You start asking the hard questions. You try to find a way to escape the heavy, quiet weight of entropy. The first question that almost everyone wrestles with is a deeply existential one. If everything is sliding toward high entropy, if every star is mathematically guaranteed to burn out and every memory is destined to dissolve into the dark, why do anything at all? Why care? Why build? Why love? Doesn't this make all of human existence completely meaningless? I am going to take a very clear, perhaps even provocative stance here. I have always found nihilism to be incredibly lazy. The argument that something only has value if it lasts forever is a massive logical error. Think about a plastic rose. It is practically immortal. It defies entropy. It will sit on a shelf unchanged for 1,000 years. But does it move you? Does it have any emotional weight? No, because a plastic rose has nothing to lose. It has nothing to live for. Now, look at a real organic rose, fragile, dew-covered. Its petals will begin to wither in a week, and eventually it will return to the soil. It is beautiful precisely because it is dying. Its temporary nature is what makes its value infinite. We do not love a sunset because it stays painted on the sky forever. We love it because it fades in a matter of minutes. The Buddha's realization of Anicca and the physicist's law of entropy are not calls to despair. They are quiet, urgent invitations to pay attention. Life is not beautiful despite impermanence. It is beautiful because of it. But then the modern mind tries to find another escape route, this time through science. You ask, what about quantum physics? What about the multiverse? If there are infinite parallel worlds where every possible outcome exists, doesn't that somehow break the rule of Anicca? Doesn't the quantum realm offer a loophole where entropy doesn't apply? It's a fascinating thought, but the physics tells us a very different story. Even in the strange, counterintuitive world of quantum mechanics, and even if we imagine a vast, infinite multiverse, the laws of thermodynamics still reign supreme. Any real physical observer, any mind that can perceive reality, must experience a forward-moving timeline. To process information, to make a decision, to simply think a single thought, your brain must burn energy. And the moment you burn energy, you must increase entropy. The arrow of time is baked into the very act of consciousness. You cannot observe a universe without making it more disordered. Impermanence is not a classical illusion. It remains the most robust, undefeated law in all of theoretical physics. I know the mathematics of quantum gravity and string theory are incredibly dense, and I am certainly not a theoretical physicist. I am confident there are people listening right now who are much closer to the cutting edge of this research than I am. If you study quantum mechanics or statistical physics, I would genuinely love to know how your specific field reconciles the quantum wave function with the brutal forward march of thermodynamic entropy. Is there a loophole I am missing, or does the math truly forbid any escape? Because when you stare into that quantum dark, you are left with a question that is almost impossible to answer. If our very ability to think, to measure, and to observe the universe requires us to create disorder, is consciousness the ultimate driver of entropy, or is entropy the force that created consciousness?
We began this journey by looking at two seemingly separate events: the violent, spectacular death of a red giant star trillions of miles away, and the silent, fragile shortening of a telomere inside your DNA. But by now, I hope you see that they are not separate at all. They are the exact same movement, the same cosmic dance. The law of entropy, the truth of Anicca. It is so easy to look at these concepts and feel the cold, hollow sense of dread. It is easy to think that if everything is destined to fall apart, then everything is a cruel joke. But that is the wrong way to look at it. This realization is not a depressing curse. It is a unifying embrace. You are not an outsider who was thrown into this cold, untearing universe. You are a part of it. The carbon in your muscles, the iron in your blood, the calcium in your bones, all of it was forged in the hearts of those dying stars we talked about. When a star explodes, it scatters the very elements that will one day become a human brain capable of looking back up at the night sky. We are the universe experiencing itself. We are the cosmos waking up for a brief, beautiful moment, looking around and realizing its own fleeting existence. We share the exact same fate as the galaxies. There is a deep, profound intimacy in that. You are never alone in your decay. You are decaying in perfect harmony with the entire cosmos. To truly feel this, you do not need a telescope and you do not need a microscope. You only need this exact moment. Right now, wherever you are, just stop. Take a slow, deep breath in. Feel the cool air enter your body. Feel the expansion. This is the low entropy state, the gathering of order, the birth. Hold it for just a second at the top, the peak, the illusion of stasis. And now, let it go. Slowly exhale. Feel the air warm up, rushing out, dispersing into the room around you. Entropy, the release of order, the death. In that one single breath, you have just experienced the entire life cycle of a star. You have experienced the rise and fall of empires, the shortening of a chromosome, the entire grand timeline of the universe happening inside your chest in the span of 3 seconds, a microcycle of birth and death. It makes you wonder, in that silent space between the exhale and the next inhale, when every star has finally gone dark, when every bone has returned to dust, and when even the memory of humanity has been entirely erased by the winds of entropy, what is it that remains? Is there a part of our consciousness that exists completely outside of these thermodynamic currents? Or is the fading itself the only thing that is truly eternal? I don't think any scientist, philosopher, or monk can give us a final, definitive answer to that. But as you sit here in the quiet aftermath of that breath, if you had to choose just one single keyword to describe the realization of your own fleeting place in this vast cosmic dance, what would that word be? For me, that word is home. May you all progress in the Dhamma. We look forward to seeing you on the next occasion. Goodbye.